Today is Father's Day. It's 2015. Right now, I feel fear. Strong fear. I've been in many situations in the world that were frightening. And I've had many situations in thought and life that were frightening. This is a different kind of fear. This is a fear that feels like a mixture between maybe I'm afraid to be born, I'm afraid to come home, I'm afraid there's not a home, and I'm afraid of dying all at once. And I associate this fear with a way of seeing that involves those four things. Am I willing to be born? Do I really want to come home? Is there such a thing as home? And am I willing to die? Now, for humans, these things mean confusing ideas because we think that birth is a one-time event, and death is a one-time event. Otherwise, it's just conceptual or metaphor to us. And we sort of can't tell in many contexts the difference between becoming ourselves and surviving or functioning correctly or adequately or successfully in some context. Even now, I'm trying to do this. I'm wrestling with those things. There's machine noise around me. I'm in a box and I'm talking into a machine. And I feel fear. Fear that I might fail. Fear that I don't know what success exactly might look like. Fear that I'll be interrupted. Fear that I'll fail to communicate the core of what I'm here for. And then I have a lot of other emotions and lots of thoughts. I think this is a lot like how it is for most of us most of the time. And what I'm really here to do is to jump off a kind of a cliff. So the fear that I feel isn't just conceptual. I can see something that feels a lot like an abyss beneath me, as one perhaps who was about to jump off such a cliff with a bungee cord or a wingsuit. The origin of the concept of father obviously has nothing to do with language. It doesn't have to do with rules or specific pictures. And it's a spirit. And it's a noble, divine, humble spirit that is indomitable and victorious, not because of something that is a given person or man, but rather by so beautifully and intelligently disappearing as an individual a father emerges in the world. It's not an accounting game. The Father does not make sacrifices. Banks and numbers have nothing to do with this. So, what is the Spirit, the origin of our sense of fatherhood? What does it mean, of course, to be a man? How did we learn to understand? Where did we get all of the conflicted nonsense we play out instead? Language and stuff, ideas and laws and things. Where did it all come from? Where did it all start? It starts every morning with the sunrise, in an absolutely physical way, so that if you take that away, everything on earth disappears. The entire history of life on earth, everything gone. In fact, if you took it away, I'm pretty sure the planets would just spin off into space. One or two might crash into each other. I'm not quite sure. And I'm not very clear on whether Earth's atmosphere would survive that event at all. So, directly exposed to time-space and no light from the sun, I'm pretty sure everything would just be gone. So every morning, and all throughout the night, there's a Father. The Father. It's not a religious idea, and it's not merely a metaphor. We're made of it. All of our technologies, the one I'm recording on, these are all things that, shall we say, mechanically manipulate aspects of solar output. X-ray technology, MRIs, everything around us is made not of parts, but is a living expression of a kind of fire we have no understanding of down here. In fact, if you bring it down here, it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And it's not exactly flame, it's something like living fire of lightning, of origin, of life and minds right now and things. So around here, whether you're religious or not, the sun is absolute. And it's a benevolent and gentle star. A slight change in the sun, if the sun were to get angry, would wipe out most of life on Earth. And similarly, if the sun were to get depressed, everything on Earth would go all to badness. Really fast, too. So that what we can see is that, as far as stars go, ours is truly beautiful and heroic and gentle. All of the history of life on Earth has emerged in and of and with and as the living star. And what's it doing? So it's doing a lot of astonishing things we don't ordinarily think about from the perspectives of science. And it can be hard, I think, for many of us to understand how to have a relationship with a star, especially if it's difficult for us to have a relationship with ourselves or our family, with nature, with time-space itself. And it's kind of ironic that we should even have to have a relationship, because by the time you have to have one, that means something's missing. So we must have been deprived of one before we have to have one with something that we're made of. How can you have to, does your hand have to have a relationship with your arm? So this is the kind of relationship we have with the sun and nature, the history of life on Earth, and each other. It's the same order of relation as your hand is to your body. And that thing that we're really fascinated with in our skulls is sort of a little possible how shall I put it? Microscale play kingdom, right? That is a lot like a sun, especially the mind. Less so the brain, but much more so the mind. So the mind shines in our being. Our mind is the shining of our waking being, part of it. Our mind is an aspect of how it can shine, I should say. And then we have sort of different, I don't want to get too complex here, but thinking and verbal thinking aren't exactly our minds, though we can mistake them for that. So I think what I'm getting at here is that inside us we have a sun and an earth and a moon. In fact, it's not really inside us, it's more like the connection between your hand and your body. We're an extension, living extension of these many beings. And so the Father is doing something in space, time. And space-time is nothing like we have experience of down on Earth. Dimensionality doesn't mean the same thing. Dimensionality itself, right? If you just go into space. What's happening down on Earth is a really peculiar, localized phenomenon. And we can see even from what we know of this solar system that it happens very uniquely for each world, and that it depends a lot upon that world's distance from the sun. And ours happens to be in what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. And we all think it's a cute and humorous comparison. But the scientists are quick to overlook the significance of this, and so perhaps are we. It's not impossible there's life on other worlds in our solar system, but Earth is the shining jewel of myriads of forms of life. That doesn't seem to be obviously apparent from any of the other worlds that we've yet been able to explore much, with machines, by the way. Well, my point is, space is nothing like what we imagine reality to be down here. It is the order above this one. So it was reasonable for people of old to look up in the sky and see something like an ocean, and something like an ocean of living origins from and in which our world forms, and from and in which our world is informed and takes its likenesses. Many orders and forms of life, for example, must, to people connected to reality, represent not helicopters. They must represent the faces and embodiments of the sky. Just in the same way that if a chemist takes a solution from which salt crystals are produced and the remnant is water, the chemist will know that the water was salty. The solution was one of salt and water. Much like that, the earth and life on Earth sort of livingly crystallizes, in a sense. Except it's a rather fluid crystal, isn't it? We're soft, aren't we? So life on Earth and the nature of its intelligences have to be an expression of what's upstairs, right? In essence, they have to be its child, which means you and I are literally, we're not made of dead star stuff, right? Although that may also be true, that the matter in our bodies was organized by stars distant, and now perhaps some gone, obviously some gone. That may be true, but that's not what's going on at all. magical dust is alive and animate now in the light of a living star, a very kind, gentle star, a very indomitable star, Sol Invictus, victorious, invincible. And what is it doing? Well, it's in time-space. Now, we don't really know exactly what that means, but if we make a children's story, it might help us understand a few things. So whatever time-space is, it's intense. Very, very intense. It's so intense that even machines can barely survive out there. And in fact, one of the reasons local time-space is extremely intense is the sun. The sun is doing myriads of, it's being myriads of being ways at once in lots of dimensions we don't even have language about. So I'm not trying to say that it knows itself, yet it seems unlikely that that's impossible. But I am trying to say that we, as the sun, can see the sun. That's pretty interesting, to put it mildly. So there's a world here where living children made of time, space, light, and matter are in union with a carefully orchestrated, continuously safe and survivable bubble. That's extremely strange. If you look around in time-space, you're not going to see much of that. It's very, very dangerous out there. It's hard to have a child, right? It's very, very difficult for a son to have a child, most likely. And it can be difficult if you manage to get one to sustain it very long. Things smack into it, if the sun is unstable, time-space itself is unpredictable, and the sun is actually doing something. Well, what is it doing? In the kid's story, we might imagine that it's both generating the possibility of a home in, what would we call it? In the cone behind it. It is going forth into time-space, going. And in the cone behind it, it's wrangling the forces of time-space to create a bubble. And in that bubble, over vast periods of human time, it has organized stable worlds, each one like a living jewel of matter, and one of them actually alive, this one for sure. And on this one, there are minds and children and living beings and places, for now. So the sun is wrestling something. And if you've ever seen people spinning fire, or swinging poi, or juggling, and things like this, similar things, yeah? You're seeing an enaction of something about the sun, particularly with things like poi spinning that have a bipolar aspect. In fact, one might say in the child story that the sun is like a spinning stick that makes a sphere. And in that sphere, it's wrangling snakes. It's wrestling the electromagnetic forces, somewhat like snakes, that our bubble is immersed in, right? And it's keeping that bubble stable enough for life, for us to have this moment together. And it's shining, and it's wrangling those forces into itself, as itself. In fact, if we imagine the sun as a very astonishing man who is at once the servant of all the children and the master of many kinds of snakes, can wrangle them into form. Yeah? And this sort of heroic, divine, truly humble somehow hero is leading the solar system through time-space. The solar system trails behind him, yeah, in a cone of spiraling worlds. And he's using the worlds to wrestle the snakes, the forces in the worlds spinning around him. And he's made of them so that the sun is so electromagnetically tangled that it can take more than 1 million years, or many, many years, at least 100,000, probably much more, for some photons released near the core of the sun to get the few light seconds or perhaps a minute distance to the surface. So that traveling at the speed of light, a photon could take 100,000 years to get to the surface of the sun. Or longer, 1 million, maybe 8 million. Which means that some of the photons that we're receiving right now we're receiving photons from the entire life of the sun. Right? We're receiving photons that are so old, they're unimaginably old. And we're receiving others that are brand new, or were even made on the way. And again, were that light to be brought down here, everything would be destroyed. That light is of another order. It is not mere energy, believe me. No mere energy produces life in its wake. Right? That's not energy up there. That's not an explosion in the sky. That's the origin of the possibility of thinking about things. And of heartbeats, right? Living eyes. Yeah? So that's the real origin of what does it mean to be father, maker, servant. The Father has tangled those snakes so perfectly into balance in and as his shining body. He's so stable that if he were to get angry for even a moment, life on Earth would disappear, right? If he even got kind of an itch toward anger, he's so stable that if he even got kind of an itch toward depression, everything would die, right? And the Earth-Moon relationship is very similar. It's so incredibly, unimaginably Goldilocks stable that it's really miraculous if you think about how unpredictable time-space is, that anything's still here at all, especially if you add what the humans have been doing instead of being human. So all of our ideas of fatherhood and leadership and manhood and all these things don't come from storybook nonsense, and they weren't made up in language. They come from a living relationship. And for people who have difficulty relating with each other or animals or a tree deeply, or a flower, if you don't have a friend who's a tree, how will you know how to make friends with the sun? To have the experience of being human, we have to know what it means to be in communion with our origins and reality. We are the sun, we are this world, we are time-space, we are those forces and histories and eternities right now here. But overlaid on top is a kind of fake sun, made of thinking and language and stories and ideas and things in books, books that replace the sun, stories from people who live in boxes, who look in boxes, who read little boxes, who hold boxes in their hands, and sleep on boxes, and store things in boxes, and everything is incredibly boxes within boxes within boxes. So, To understand the sun, we need to understand the children and the Earth-Moon relationship. In a sense that is real, the moon represents the friendly aspect of time-space, the mother. Now it seems weird that the moon might represent this rather than the earth. It seems weird even to me. And yet, represent isn't the right word. The moon is the embodiment of. It's hard to explain why it isn't the earth to those who've grown up thinking this. But the earth is a child between the moon and the sun. No moon, no Goldilocks. See, that's the problem right there. And in some way, the moon is like the impossible locality of the spirit of the mother, which is an aspect of the medium in which the sun is traveling. And so the sun is informing this aspect of the mother to create the bubble in which life comes and is sustained. And the moon is balancing magnetic forces, the snakes. Yeah? She is also handling the snakes in the woman's way from the absence position locally. So in a sense, the moon is kind of the physical expression of the necessary absence of a mother who is everywhere. And the difference in the polarity of that absence is that without the moon present, no life. With the moon present, life has cycles. So there's something very profound about the moon. And to understand the Father, it's impossible not to understand the moon. And that the Father sort of is working with two different polarities of snakes. A kind that is safe and friendly to life and the mother, and a kind that he wrangles into his own being, as his own being. And also repulses, yeah? And maybe defeats, or renders no longer present locally. And we have these images of angels with their feet on a serpent, right? This is where this image comes from. The sun is the angel, Michael, with his foot on the serpent. What is the serpent? It's the bad side of, not the bad side, it is the, yeah, this is a more difficult question. Perhaps we'll suspend this one for the moment, since it leads down many trails, as serpents are wont to do. But you can see, right, that this is present in our ideas about divinity. And I guess there was some point where the people of the book religions decided that it was too dangerous to allow the sun to actually be authentically known to human beings. Perhaps they thought the fire of knowing the sun was too dangerous. For with knowing the sun comes a fire inside you. So they made books and representations and costumes and hats and things and symbols and stuff. And they tried to tell us, that it's not the sun. Don't worry about the sun. That's just something God put there, like to make it okay and stuff. I guess, I don't know. It's pretty obvious that that's self-conflictedly impossible. Right? No sun, no Bibles. So, problem there. No sun, no minds, no Bibles, no religions, no representations of relationships, just time, space. So you can see there's like true relation, and then there's a bunch of thinking and overlays and stuff that humans have while we're awake. And these become a bit of a false sun, and then our cultures refashion them for all kinds of really unimaginably ignorant and cruel purposes, and we direct them all these purposes against each other and ourselves, and we compete. Or we make unities that are stable, and like little solar systems that have a good sun and a brilliant, kind mother. Now the sun isn't stable because he's good at being stable necessarily, right? He's not trying to be stable. He's stable because he's relationally impossible for him not to be true. There's no other way to be. The sun can't falsify himself. Yeah. But our mind in the waking world, acting as a sun or in place of the sun, right? In many different domains, yeah, we can kind of make false stars. And the cultures themselves comprise false, fake suns that tell us what we're supposed to be and do and think and feel, most of which is terrible for everything and everyone, and actually insulting to what it means to be human or alive, intelligent, or like the sun. So we get a bunch of really weird, conflicted, ironic representations and ideas and concepts. And the thing I'm trying to get at here, which is ironic since I'm using language, is that it's not conceptual. The relationship between your hand and you has nothing to do with concepts, and you can't move your hand with concepts. In fact, if the relationship were to be broken, you would be very sad, and your hand would be really not good. So then you might get a prosthetic hand. One that's not connected to your body or life or history or anything. Or the sun, yeah, except in a very strange, artifacted way. And you wouldn't really be able to feel with it. And it would not cross your wrist. Wires would cross where living nerves that carried living lightning once crossed a gap, like the one between the sun and the earth. And by the way, without the moon, I doubt we could maintain the bubble of our atmosphere, and so the sunlight would obliterate us, right? We all think we experience sunlight down here? No, 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 my friends. To experience sunlight is a different thing depending on where you are. And down here, what we experience is not sunlight, but an incredibly carefully, astonishingly filtered, survivable version. Again, that becomes beating hearts and minds and lives, and children and reality, yeah? So, no, sunlight is something really, you wouldn't survive it. And if you got anywhere near the sun, I mean, just outside of Earth's atmosphere is pretty rough, right? It's a storm of incredible domains of energy and magnetism. Plus, there are little particles flying around at unbelievable velocities, too. So it's pretty crazy out there. And down here what we get is a really like a pinhole irised version of sunlight. And strangely, our minds are similar, especially the waking mind. It hungers for a broader iris, but it's terrified that the iris might widen just a little bit. The waking thinking mind is frightened of the light of being. It's just as frightened of this light as it is of death, which is why I was so scared when I began my bird walk here. There are many machines around me. They're doing something that isn't like the sun. Only organisms can do something like what the sun does. And the earth, and the moon, and our minds. And we're afraid of the real light of the origins of our minds. We think, for example, that way lies madness. Yet we dwell in overlays that are 12 times more insane. It would be impossible to be as mad as we are. Impossible. had we any contact with each other, our origins, nature, time-space itself, and some of the stories and figures that might help us understand our real position, our real participation in these matters. For down here on Earth, we have the chance to be the sun and the moon. In our bellies, for 6/7 of the history of life on Earth, there were no brains, and in our bellies, that 6/7 of the history is alive. It's our guts. And while it's a bit of a hyperbole to say this, the primary nerve trunk that connects the gut and the brain, most of the traffic travels gut to brain. And if we watch very closely from some perspectives that are really important to pay attention to, guts tell brains what to be. You don't feel feelings in your head. You feel feelings in your gut. Wouldn't it be interesting if the sun didn't feel feelings, didn't feel the wrestling, right, in his body, in his being, his way of being and going, but felt it in his gut, which would be like the earth, where actually all the living guts that we know of exist, and where for 6/7 of the history of life on Earth, life was guts. Yeah. And so when I feel emotions like fear, in a sense, my gut is wrestling snakes, much like the sun. And really interestingly, this produces in me minds. If I react to the snakes in my gut, my mind kind of collapses and I stop going and I start balking in various domains and reacting and such. Yeah. I stop being myself and I start becoming more like thinking and conceptual prediction and statistical analysis and this kind of thing. So, in a sense, the sun feels and thinks and knows with the minds of the living beings of Earth, and there finds the results of his travel. Yeah? Is it good? Is it true? And finds correction there. And our minds and bodies are a bit like this. Most of us is our body. And at night, when we fall asleep, most of the mind transforms. And our metabolism changes its master, has a new master at night, so to speak. And everything becomes flow and like water again. A bit like time-space itself, in fact. Identity is fluid, relations are real, not representational. We know what things are by the sense of them rather than their names or addresses. And we have an experience of flow being. Huh? And even in these experiences, it's as if we're wrestling snakes of a kind. So there's a lot of things I'm trying to get at here that are difficult to point directly at, and forgive me if I'm a little clumsy, but in my guts I feel my encounter with the world. And I can have thoughts that generate feelings in my guts. If I move my mind in certain directions, we might say. I can easily generate snakes, and if I move my mind in other ways, I can calm and reorganize them. And then I can come forth. When I'm surrounded by snakes, I'm busy fighting. And it doesn't so much matter if I made them, culture made them, we made them together against each other in nature. There's millions of these sort of little jolts, right, that travel between us. So we're all kind of wrangling snakes, and there's a way that the sun does this and a way that the moon does this. And they are, in nature, polar opposites that contain each other. So the sun is very gravitic, and is the result of that gravity, that feminine drawing together. Constantly, in fact, we might even say the sun is eternally collapsing into tangled new expressions of possibility, exploding into them, literally, as it pulls our world through space. And when it shines in the morning, the light is bluish, and when it sets in the evening, it is reddish. And when it sets, we will go to sleep, and, Sol Invictus will return to his origins. Or the moon shall dissolve into hers, perhaps somewhat together. But in life, we're fighting a lot of fictional snakes, and in fact, what we're fighting with isn't even ourselves. It's like a mask or something. We're fighting each other. Everything's confused. It's not possible to be a father or to understand what it means to be a father in a context where everything corrupts, co-ops, pornographizes, legalizes, defends, falsely defends, poisons, threatens. It's impossible, nor can one be a mother. Our culture is like the bad aspect, the dangerous aspect of time-space. Everything, the collectives, which seem to be weirdly projections themselves of something, rather than human or alive or intelligent, it's like a mass swarm of snakes, and the mothers face it and the fathers face it. It's not safe to come home. We don't know if there could be a home. How can there be a home? It's all snakes. And the one thing that seems to be, in our world, snake mastering, right, to be protected from snakes and be able to get the snakes to do what you want, is cash. Now, once it was relationships with nature and the sky, our origin in each other. And now it's cash. Now it's pure representation. And that's undergoing its second reincarnation as information and analysis, what we might call algorithmic intelligence. That's the next cache, and we're being made into it. So, is it safe to be born as myself? Is there such a thing as home? Can there be a home? Can I come home? Will death destroy me? These are the pivots around which we wrangle our snakes. And the strange direction this compass points in is into nature, each other, true relation, and our origins, sky. And when I say nature, I mean direct relationships with living places and things as our way of being alive, together, with and for those living places and each other, in recognition of the entire history of life on Earth, and the history of our own people, all of them, all that we have struggled for, and said, and thought, and done, and suffered, instead of something like what we know we came to be and do and see and become together. It's not clear to the thinking mind what to do. And as isolated individuals, isolated from our origins, nature, isolated sometimes by certain forms of what look like intelligence, isolated by opinion, isolated by class, isolated by race, isolated by gender, isolated by the judgments and analysis of myriads of fictional collectives and others, isolated by threats, isolated by fear, isolated because there's nowhere to be at all, and just be. Together. I so late. I am so late. I'm so late that there's no party of any kind I'm not already late for. There's no coming together of any kind that whatever I might have been didn't already miss. And there's this feeling of just lag. Right? There's this feeling of just incredible lag. It's going to be confusing when we first encounter this gap between the possibility of being born right now and of being home, becoming home together now, in all the ways that we can discover and explore and play with and thinking, or serving the overlays and building constructs and masks and getting cash and harming each other, harming the environment, harming ourselves. I mean, essentially we're taught to abandon ourselves into fictions. So it's not surprising that we don't have any idea, for example, what the sky is. I mean, I could imagine if you kind of got confused about what was right next to you, but how could we forget what the sky means and that we belong in and as and for it? How did we get anywhere where that could not be obvious to every waking human person? The pivots of our personality, the pivots of this supposed individuality we're supposed to enjoy the privileges of apparently somewhere, have all been falsified because they can't be stipulated. Once stipulated, they're dead and prison-like. It's like stipulated marriages. We are the marriage of the mothers and the fathers, each one of us, each moment, like the sun. We live surrounded in and buried, sometimes by, constructs and fictions, quote, responsibilities, unquote, that interfere with or make it very confusing to be brave enough to be human and alive and learn what it means to be intelligent together. And so for most of our waking lives, we're doing every other thing, and it's very confusing, and it's in conflict with our hearts and our souls, and it's in conflict with the sun. It's in conflict, absolute conflict with nature. It abolishes nature and puts dead boxes and machines there instead. There are children who think it would be who think it would be preferable to have a prosthetic hand. And thus we may surmise that by the time it gets to that degree, the living hand that was our minds has become something else and is now both dominating, aggressive, well-armed, domineering, and intending to never let go at any cost, including the cost of our lives, the history of life on Earth, our people, everything that our people have ever been or done or hoped for, anything, any cost. No, the hand simply wants to remain dominant, a fake hand, in the place of our minds, and especially our collectives, almost every single kind of them. They have to be half machine or half fiction to even interact or exist in the world. There are exceptions. Or there are exceptions that, shall we say, modulate that half fiction very beautifully and very intelligently so that they can even produce from it its opposite result. If we're not holding hands, the hands of our minds become falsified. If we're not holding hands in daily life with and for each other, every person we see right now, every animal, every living place right now, we have to hold hands at least in our minds and hearts in this way and learn to again. Because without that, we won't have minds and hearts. We're going to have a false son, a fake version of what fatherhood is supposed to be, a fake, impossible version of what motherhood is, quote, supposed to be. Like some fiction wrote the book of supposed to and then told mothers how to be mothers. Now, in a culture as confused as ours, our mothers and fathers are so broken, you have to have laws. So that's the other, right? That's the ironic edge. It can be explicitly demonstrated that we are no longer intelligent enough to raise ourselves, each other, or anything. Therefore, the responsibility is going to fall to us not to fulfill responsibilities, but to recover ourselves together, to discover what it means to be human and fathers and mothers and intelligent and working with and for each other. However we may choose to do that going forward. But we cannot sleep in service to machines that are grinding our lives and minds and dreams and world apart for the simple sake of domination and continuance of these processes. They're inhuman, they're unintelligent, they are themselves machine-like. They are the counterfeiting of the light of our humanity. And one could say that many great effects were known by man by bringing the light of the sun down to earth, but I would disagree. The light of the sun is already bathing earth. And what we've done with things like nuclear power and the ability to manipulate those forces has been catastrophic. 2,100 nuclear explosions on the face of this world, spewing deadly to life toxins and poisons into the environment forever. Radioactive waste, the lethalist kind of thing that we could possibly imagine that is nowhere produced in nature. We have catastrophic accidents, quote unquote, handling this because not only would a real intelligent human collective be challenged profoundly to intelligently handle something like that, the collectives we have are really too dangerous to be trusted with silverware. So giving them something like atomic power is abjectly insane. It would be, I don't know how to make an analogy that ridiculous. It's just putting a time bomb in with a bunch of children who are going to play with it like a toy and maybe blow it up faster. So again, like in intelligence itself, like the light within our minds, we have to be cautious about the purposes for which we organize and direct it. Like our hearts, like our guts, like our lives. Why are we doing things? Soul's purposes, the sun's purposes, and the purposes of time-space. Not that they are formal like ours. They are not stipulated. They simply are. Emerge as living beings on a delicate world here. A little bubble. A brief blip in Saul's lifetime and a tiny flash in the history of the universe. But down here on Earth, we're participating in eternity. And all of the things that we say and do are not of the orders we imagine. They affect many domains we don't think about, relational domains. I'm excited by the opportunity to remember what it means to learn and see on a living world where every creature here and every organism, every living place is the intelligence of time-space, is the living face of it. I'm excited about the possibility of recognizing this together again and what it might mean to be human if we understood a little bit more about where and who we are and how we may become ourselves rather than masks, prosthetics, functions, statistics, information, browsers, consumers, spectators, passively receptive slaves who every day go to some kind of work that attacks mostly everything and participate in conveniences that destroy ourselves and our intelligence. and celebrate them madly. One day, 50,000 people will gather in a stadium, and in the next 4 hours, they'll change human history instead of winning a sports game. And on that day, I will be smiling, and so too will the sun, and we might have some idea what it's like to be a father, and realize that there's no such thing as an individual father. We're all fathers together, or we can't really be them. We're all fathers for each other, or there aren't any. We're all mothers in each other, or they disappear. We're all mothering each other, or something else is going on. So I'm excited about finding out what that looks like, and it's something we can all do every day, all the time. You are the sun. You are the history of life on Earth. You are the moon and the sky. What will we become together, and why? What purposes will we trust? I hope that we can find a way to become a living compass, which is indeed the true likeness of nature, and entirely unlike most of what we're taught and most of what we think. Our origin is more astonishing than the entire vista of fantasy and science fiction. Your role exceeds every character you've ever encountered. Get a taste of that. Take my hand. Let's join some others. Let's become the taste of that again.